Welcome to week 7 of Happiest 101. Can you believe that it is almost over? There's going to be this class and one more class, and then that's it. And if, we've talked about what are the things that are going to make you happy and how to put those into your life. But what if that's not working? So I think that today's class is kind of that, like, what if the things you're finding that your happiness really isn't going up that much, to be able to directly address that, that if you are still struggling to be long-lastingly happier, that your numbers aren't going up. So today should answer some questions for you. So I wanted to briefly touch on the home opportunities for last time. That wonderful, amazing video by Nick Vujicic's, I love living life, I am happy. I just think that is so amazingly inspirational. And when he comes over to the side of the pool and you can see he's poised, he's going to jump into the pool, and I'm like, don't do it. But I mean, I have no idea how he's doing it, but he somehow is swimming. I mean, everyone would, including myself, would have said, well, that's impossible. I have a hard enough time swimming with arms and legs. So I don't know how he does it. But he seems to go out of his way. If somebody tells him he can't do something, he seems to go out of his way to prove that that's wrong. And, so I have a hard time, when people say, I can't be happy. I find that, after watching that video, people have a really hard time saying, I can't. Like, if this guy with no arms and no legs can go golfing and swimming and surfing, um, surely I can be happier. So, anyway, I just find that incredibly inspiring. And then you have the other video, Sean Aker, and he was talking about how you can be happier at work. I want to put in a plug for Sean's book called The Happiness Advantage. I really, really like it. For just the tiniest split second, I thought about making that the text for the class rather than Sonia Lubomirski's How of Happiness. I know it's blasphemy for me to even think about for a millisecond, but Sonia's just too good. She covers too many things. She does it too well. And I just, in all of my years of teaching about happiness, I've been open to having another text, but I just haven't found anything that even remotely does it like Sonia's book. So I will continue to endorse. By the way, speaking of endorsing, Sonia, just brand new came out with a new book called How to Feel Loved. And super, super, it's still actually here in the Amazon box. So super excited to find a little time and start reading that, because, she just bar none is the best at what she does. Okay, going to cover some very important topics today. I think every single class they say, yeah, we have a lot to cover. Well, we do have a lot to cover. So today we're going to talk about the mechanics of optimism and pessimism. We're going to talk about a very important concept called thinking errors. And we're also going to talk about, finish the sentence for me, post-traumatic, you probably say post-traumatic stress disorder. But have you ever heard of post-traumatic growth? Most people don't even know that that's even a thing. But actually, post-traumatic growth is much, much more common than post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Anyway, without further ado, I think I'm going to start with thinking errors. When I say the words thinking errors, you, like most human beings, you want to immediately, you want to sound smart and you want to have the right answer. And so as human beings, we start filling it in with what we think that it is. And so when I say the words thinking errors, I'm guessing you've tried to backfill what you think it means. Please take that and pitch it out, because most people think that thinking errors are essentially jacked up thinking. And it is not. Big block capital letters. That is not what thinking errors are. Thinking errors are, the crux of it is not taking full responsibility. And who the hell wants to? Who wants to take full responsibility? It can be incredibly tough to look in the mirror and take full responsibility. So we are very, very creative in pointing the finger in virtually any other direction other than ourselves. And I do think that thinking errors, in a way, has an important function, kind of as like a shock absorber. So if I was driving home and I hit some poor kid on his bicycle and he's laying in front of my vehicle bleeding, I can almost guarantee you I'm not going to jump out of the vehicle and say, "Oh, I take full responsibility for this." I'm going to say things like, "It was dark. He came out of nowhere. And what kind of a parent lets their kid on a dark, busy street anyway?" And it's like, those are all thinking errors, because I don't want to face what I just did. But Lord help me, in between the day of the accident and the day that I go to trial, the judge is going to be listening for thinking errors. And if I say, "Well, Judge, this just wouldn't have happened if the parents had kept their child in at home," like, that judge is going to have me for lunch, because judges are listening for two things. They're listening for whether the person is taking responsibility, and they're also listening for, does the person have remorse? So thinking errors are incredibly important for you to understand. And so in the short run, it kind of serves as a shock absorber. But the problem is that in the long run, if we don't understand thinking errors, if we keep using them, that will keep us in what we call victim stance. And so, as I talk about thinking errors, please don't think of this as a stick to beat yourself with. This is more like, I think of this more like the keys to the jail that you may have created for yourself. So, I have a number of stories. I have 3 stories to share with you to kind of shine a light on thinking errors from different perspectives. And one of them I think you'll especially like, because I'm going to tell on myself. Because guess what? We all use thinking errors. So don't tell me that you don't do thinking errors. All that tells me is that you have a blind spot. It isn't about whether or not you use thinking errors. It's about becoming wise and understanding when you use thinking errors, so that you don't do them nearly as often. And if you do use them, that you at least catch yourself pretty quickly. All right. Without further ado, I'll give you the first story. And the first story is about an Asian woman, and she moved to Salt Lake City. Well, you might not be familiar with Salt Lake City, but it's very, very, very Caucasian. And so this Asian woman has this job all lined up. She gets here, and she used her last dime getting here, and she she had that job in place. And by the way, this is based on a true story. So she gets here, she has the job lined up, she starts her new job, and she lost her job within a few months. She plays the race card. She's like, "Oh my goodness, an Asian woman's never going to get a fair break here in Caucasian laden Salt Lake City." But, as I said, she used her last dime getting here, so she has to hurry up and find another job. And to her credit, she did. She found another job. Well, guess what? She lost that job within a few months. Again, she plays the race card, saying, an Asian woman's never going to get a fair break here. So she turned around, and you might have guessed, she got a third job. Lost that job within a few months. So she did this 7 times. 7 times. She got a job and lost that job within a few months. So this is the part I took a little creative license with. So let's say that she has a friend, and the friend says, well, they don't just like, cut you loose. They have to like write you up or something, right? And she says, well, yeah, I mean, there's words on a piece of paper, but they very well can't go on record and say, we're letting you go because we're a bunch of racists. And the friend says, well, why don't you show me the first write up? Huh. It says here you were late every day. I mean, is that true? Well, yeah, I mean that's true and everything, but like this isn't about that at all. This is about racism. I thought you were my friend. Whose side are you on anyway? And the friend says, why don't you humor me and show me the other six write-ups? And sure enough, every single one of these write-ups says that she has a problem being on time. Now, the Asian woman has a choice. We all have a choice. I'm always pounding about choice. But she has a choice that she can either double down or she can have what I've come to call the wonderful, terrible moment. And I call it the wonderful, terrible moment because the wonderful and the terrible are so tangled together that you can't really tease them apart. So you're going to have the wonderful, but you're also going to have the terrible. And what differentiates that is taking full responsibility. So the Asian woman's uh, wonderful, terrible moment might have sounded like this. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. What have I done? Oh my gosh, do you know what I've put my family through? I'm, you know what? I am going to be on time from every day from this point forward. I'm never going to lose a job because of being late again. So, as hard as that was for her to take responsibility, she also, you heard a shift where she said, I'm going to do something different with my behavior. Because when she's pointing her finger at racism, or you point your finger at another person or whatever, um, little sparks shoot out the end of your fingers because you just gave, in her case, she just gave racism all the power. And because racism has all the power by default, that means that she has no power, which causes us to feel frustrated, anxious, hopeless, helpless, depressed. And so when we take back the responsibility for our lives, it changes everything. So that is the first story. And I do want to say that, just because well, let me back up just a titch. So the divining rod I have found in my life is usually if I feel resentful or victimized, I am probably using thinking errors. Now, not always, but probably. Now, this is just a personal estimate that I have. I would say somewhere between 80 and 85% of the time that if I'm feeling resentful or victimized, I am probably using thinking errors. Now, that leaves some latitude, right? Because you know what? Sometimes we are victimized. Sometimes we have been done wrong. And um, so that is a completely separate conversation. But I do, and that's going to be something that you're going to have to figure out as to whether you're using thinking errors or if you truly have been victimized. By the way, if we are using thinking errors, there's three that usually will make the list. Now, we're very creative in not taking responsibility. So, depending on whose list you're looking at, we have somewhere between 33 and 41 different thinking errors that we might use to avoid taking full responsibility. But the three usual suspects, the ones that we reach for most often, are blaming, minimizing, and justifying. Blaming, minimizing, justifying. And you can kind of feel it, when you're feeling victimized if you're paying attention to it. So, Uh, I'm going to move on to the second story. As I promised, I'm going to tell on myself. And this happened about 10 years ago now, so it's been a minute. So this was involving a new friend that I had made, and I love playing board games. And so it was a brand new relationship. And so I was going over to his house for really the first time with the intent of me being the Robin to his Batman and playing like co-host to a game day. And so I got there probably an hour early. And I know this will sound really strange, but when I showed up, I could not figure out where to park. I know it sounds really weird, right? But they had a particularly wide driveway and two garage doors, and then there was a strip of gravel off to the side, and and I couldn't figure, should I park in the driveway? If I do, should I be straight on? Should it be diagonal? Am I going to block people from getting out of the garage? And so anyway, I used my best judgment and I parked on the gravel along the fence. And so, I've got two armfuls of games bringing in and all that. And so I didn't, after I parked, I didn't really give it a second thought. So I go in and helping prep the food and get everything ready and setting up games and all that. And people start arriving and we were conversing and strategizing and taking our turns and eating and all the stuff you do in a game day. And we were probably an hour into it when his 17-year-old son walks in the front door and in front of everybody says, "Frank, you park like a frickin' douche." No, what? Like, at the time I was 50 years old. He's 17. I am not used to anyone talking to me like that, let alone a 17-year-old kid, but I'm in guest mode. So I smile and I'm sure there was a little trickle of blood as I bit my tongue. And so I said, "Okay, what's wrong with how I parked?" So he takes me out on the front porch and I can indeed see that even though I used my best judgment, that where I parked jacked up the whole system, which is ironically what I was ultimately trying to avoid. And so I moved my car and I was very grumpy about what the 17-year-old kid said to me. But I walked back in and they're like, "Frank, it's your turn." "Oh, yeah, right. Okay." So I jumped back into the fray and we're taking our turns and eating and strategizing and all the stuff you do on a game day. But then, after a couple of hours, we say goodnight and now I get in my vehicle and now I'm driving home. And I'm getting pissed. And I'm getting more pissed as I'm driving home because now I'm not being distracted by taking my turn and all that. I'm in my head and I'm thinking about what this kid said to me. And I'm just getting myself like more and more worked up. Now, by the time I got home, I was pretty lathered up with anger. So I said, "You know what? I'm going to use all this energy for something good." Now, at the time, I was remodeling my basement, and I was finally at a place where I was going to paint my basement. In fact, I had the cans sitting out and the rollers sitting out. All I had to do was pour the paint and get going. And so I was like, "You know what? I'm going to use all this anger for something good." So I'm like slashing on the paint and I'm cussing his name and "Who in the hell do you think you are? And you should respect your elders." And I'm just going for it. And I would say I probably got about a quarter of the way around the basement before there was the first bleep on the radar. And by bleep on the radar means that I took any sort of responsibility. And it probably sounded like, why didn't I say something? But that doesn't make it okay. And you should respect your elders and cussing his name and all that. So the more that I painted my way around the basement, the more that there were these bleeps on the radar. Now, when I got back around to the beginning, I'd really gotten all that anger out of my system, and there were, quite a few bleeps on the radar by then. So I remember I put down the roller, I took a deep breath, and I said, "Okay, I take full responsibility." Now, when I say that I take full responsibility, I am not saying that I'm taking responsibility for what he said. I do not have, as we've talked about, control. I do not have control over what he said, but I do have control over how I respond, or in this case, failed to respond. I failed to be assertive. I let this 17-year-old kid punk me in front of a room full of people, including my new friend, and I didn't say a word. So sometimes when you have the wonderful, terrible moment, there just really isn't anything that you can do about it. The moment of action has come and gone, and you're just going to have to learn your lesson for next time. But this wasn't one of those times. So I got back in my vehicle, drove the 20 minutes across town, knocked on my friend's door, and said, I really need to talk to your son. Now, I don't necessarily have to tell this part of the story to get the point across, but I do think it's interesting, so I'm going to include it. First of all, there's an old saying, praise publicly, criticize privately. So people respond very differently when you dress them down in front of other people versus if you don't. So I took him aside, and he immediately was actually very apologetic. He said, did I do something wrong? And I was like, we definitely need to talk. So during that conversation, he said, Frank, you're new on the scene. You're my dad's friend. I don't really know what to do with you or how to talk to you. So I was talking to you like I talk to my friends. I was like, no, so you talk to your friends? Okie dokie. But, I made it clear that him talking to me like that was not going to work. But my assumptions were that he was trying to embarrass me and disrespect me. But in fact, he was actually trying to treat me like a friend. He was trying to relate to me. So that really helped me to understand things differently. And then we came to an understanding, and we have a good relationship to this day. So, and I'm sharing that story because, again, I want to drive home the point that we all do it, but also it would have been super easy for me to stay focused on him and be angry at him rather than me taking responsibility. I could have even called up a friend and said, hey, can you believe what this 17-year-old, oh my gosh, these kids today don't have any respect. And my friend might have had good intentions of supporting me, but actually isn't that further entrenching my own feelings of victimhood? So I have a little poem. I think I have it memorized pretty well. And it does such a great job of encapsulating thinking errors. So the name of the poem is called There's a Hole in My Sidewalk, The Romance of Self-Discovery. And the author's name is Portia Nelson. And it goes like this. Chapter 1. I walk down a street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. But it isn't my fault. It takes me a long time to get out. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in again. It's happening all over again, but it isn't my fault. Still takes me a long time to get out. Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in again. But this time I know what's happening. It's my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down a different street. Now, you can kind of hear the echoes of the Asian woman's story in this poem. For the first 2 chapters, she's walking down the same street, falling in the same hole. It's not my fault. It's racism. And, there's that old saying, I'm sure you've heard it. If you do what you've always done, you get what you've always got. So wash, rinse, repeat, right? If she continues to blame something else for her problems, then she's going to continue to feel victimized. Again, I urge you, with this knowledge, Please do not get a stick out and start beating yourself. Please be very, very gentle. The wonderful, terrible moment is already hard enough. You don't need to like, why didn't I do this a long time ago? Why didn't I know? Be as compassionate and gentle on yourself as you possibly can. This is hard enough. It takes a lot of courage to look in the mirror and say, maybe I have contributed to my own misery. Okay? All right. Moving on. So story number 3 is not so much really a story per se. As I've mentioned several times, I have been teaching Happiest 101 or Happiness 101 here in Utah for, I think this is our 17th year. I've been doing it since 2009. And so I found that it's necessary to talk about thinking errors as part of the class. So I teach them essentially the same thing that I just taught you. And then what I do as part of the class is that I give them a scenario, and then we go through different scenarios, and I ask them, is the person in the scenario taking responsibility, or are they using thinking errors? So I'd like to do that with you. So if you need to pause in between each one and think about it, that's great. So the scenario at the beginning is always the same, and it's very simple. The student comes to Happiness 101 and they haven't done their homework. And I say, hey, student, how come you didn't do your homework? And then the rest of the scenario is how they respond. So let's jump in. So if I say, hey, student, how come you didn't do your homework? And they say, well, I noticed you didn't do everything you were supposed to do this week, Frank. Are they taking responsibility, or are they using thinking errors? Now that one is pretty easy, right? That's very blatant about how they shifted things around and we're no longer even talking about them and they're not doing their homework. They're trying to shift it around and make it about me. So I think that one is pretty easy. Okay, erase the whiteboard. So if I say, hey student, how come you didn't do your homework? And they say, oh, I forgot. Are they using thinking errors, or are they taking responsibility? Now, oftentimes in class, I'll get kind of a mixed response on this one. But what do you think? Okay, the person is using thinking errors. They're not taking responsibility. And you know what? Truth be told, I have a very bad memory. It's very challenging for me. As I get older, it seems to be getting worse. And so I have to write myself little notes, and sometimes I'll have to set an alarm for myself, even 10 minutes from now, to remember certain things. So, but I don't lean on that as an excuse. I take responsibility for that, and I do everything that I possibly can. Otherwise, I would just be constantly apologizing. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot, I forgot, I forgot, I forgot. So while that is a real thing, I need to take responsibility. That's the hand that I was dealt. I need to take responsibility for my life and do the best that I can with that hand that I've been dealt. All right, let's move on. If I say, hey, student, how come you didn't do your homework? And they say, well, I had family come into town and I chose to spend time with them rather than do the homework. What do you think? Are they using thinking errors, or are they taking full responsibility? Okay, you might have picked up on it. So they use the magic word, chose. So if you're saying choice or choose or any of its other derivatives, you're probably going to be taking responsibility. If a student comes to class and they say, hey, and I say, hey, how come you didn't do your homework? And they say, because I chose not to. They're not making any excuses. There was a choice to be made. That's the choice that they made. And so I've never given anybody a hard time for saying, I chose not to. Okay, moving on. Now this one is my absolute favorite because it always erupts in this like great class discussion. Okay, beginning of the scenario is the same. Hey student, how come you didn't do your homework? And they say, oh, because I'm lazy. Are they taking responsibility or are they using a thinking error? Let you think for just a moment. You can have that class discussion in your head. Okay, the answer is that they're using a thinking error. You didn't hear the word choose or choice or any of its other derivatives. So here they are, they're taking a supposed characteristic that they just can't help and saying, well, gosh, Frank, I really wanted to do your homework, but gosh, I'm just so lazy. And you could swap those words out where, if you were to say, I'm disorganized, or I'm forgetful, as I've already talked about, or I'm a Capricorn, I'm not a morning person, whatever you're filling that in with, that is an excuse. And sometimes, as gently as I possibly can, when I hear my students using thinking errors like, I'm just too busy, or I forgot, or I'm lazy, and as gently as I possibly can, I'll ask them, how much of your life doesn't look the way that you want it to because of the words that just came out of your mouth? And usually they're like, oh man, yeah, like a lot. And so the purpose of me sharing about thinking errors with you, again, this should be as gentle of a process as it possibly can be. But I would really hate for you to not make the progress that you're looking for in Happiest 101 because there's some sort of a thinking error that you are not aware of. So I challenge you to go out and do some research on thinking errors and find out which thinking errors are you using, and how can you be aware of those thinking errors so that you can start to like not fall in the hole. Or if you do fall in the hole, because I still fall in the hole sometimes, but I'll look around and I'll be like, oh, this is familiar. Oh, did I do it? Yeah, I did it again. But again, it's that taking responsibility is what gets you out of the hole and out of that victim stance. So that is thinking errors. And I really, really hope that you'll give it some serious thought, because recognizing and dealing with your thinking errors can be an absolute game changer and help you to become ultimately more happy, because you're going to be taking full responsibility for your life. Speaking of thinking errors, you could use thinking errors when it comes to optimism or pessimism, because we've heard the words like a born optimist. And so if I struggle with optimism and I'm using a thinking error, I might think, well, I'm not a born optimist, I must be a born pessimist. And that makes it sound like that's hard baked into us and we just can't help it. And so now I'm gonna, I already told on myself once today, but I guess I'm gonna do it again. So, I've been teaching Happiness 101, as I said, since 2009. And I think that this happened probably about 2 years into the class. And I had one of my students, because I was part of the class as the same test that you took on the optimism test at authentichappiness.org. One of my students said, well, hey, Frank, have you taken the optimism test? And I realized, oh, I haven't taken it. I better, I should be willing to do anything that I'm asking my students to do. So I took the optimism test. And me being me, rather than me just taking the test results at face value, I wanted to really do a deep dive. So, I read an entire book about it called Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman. Highly recommend that book. When I did the deep dive on what my test results meant, it said essentially, Frank, the happy therapist, you are hopelessly pessimistic. Hopelessly pessimistic. And I was like, no, like I can't be the happiest therapist and be hopelessly optimistic or hopelessly pessimistic. There's no way. And so I did a deep dive on the book and I came to like really understand how optimism and pessimism works because they're kind of like two sides of the same coin. And once you understand the mechanics of that, it's actually very easy for you to dial in your optimism really to be at whatever level you want it to be. Now, an interesting point that Seligman makes in the book is that we can be too optimistic. There's a point where being too optimistic could actually be dangerous. If you think of a pilot, for example, you don't want if you're going on some big trip and they've got hundreds of lives on that plane, you don't want the pilots that's going to be like, we don't need to do the safety checks. You guys worry too much. Like, well, it'll be fine. No, no, no. You want those safety checks to be done for sure. Your surgeon, same thing. It's like you want a surgeon that's going to be taking all of this seriously. Oh, don't worry, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Like, no, no, like you want somebody that, is dialed in there. So I'm not optimistic to the point of being dangerous, but like now, since I have used the techniques and learned optimism, I am now very strong and moderately optimistic. So I guess I wasn't so hopeless after all. So I wanted to talk a little bit about these mechanics of optimism and pessimism. So it's really measured on three things: personal, pervasive, and permanent. So personal means the word I or me is involved. So you're directing that at yourself. Pervasive means through and through. So it isn't relegated to one segment of my life. It is in the whole thing. I'm going to explain more about this in a second. And then permanent is just that. It's not that I'm having trouble today. It's like it's always like this. It's never going to be better. So that's probably a great thing for you to watch out for when you're trying to be more optimistic, is watch out for those absolutes. So you should never use absolutes. Did you catch that? Okay, well, you get your fun where you can. So let's say that I am working on a truck and it's hot and it's July and I'm out there and I'm sweating and I'm frustrated and there's a stubborn bolt and I just can't get this bolt to release. And so, I'm wrenching on it, I'm tugging on it, and the wrench slips and I rack up my knuckles for the third time on the engine block and they're all bloody and I jump off the truck and I go, I can't do anything right ever. Okay, so let's break down that statement. The word I is involved, very first word, so it's pointed at myself. When I said I can't do anything right, so remember I mentioned about pervasive, through and through. I didn't say I suck as a mechanic. I didn't say that I can't fix this truck. I said I can't do anything right. And you know what? Your brain does a very interesting thing. When you make statements like this, it believes you. So when I say I can't do anything right ever, it's going to believe that. Now let's speak to the permanence part. I said I can't do anything right ever. I didn't say I can't do anything right today. I can't do anything right this week. I said I can't do anything right ever. So it's saying that even though this is a very specific situation, I'm making a statement that's checking all the boxes. Yes, it's personal. Yes, it's pervasive. And yes, it's permanent. So in cognitive therapy, there is a technique called disputation or to dispute. And even if I'm still really frustrated, if I dispute the statement, it actually falls apart very easily. So the disputation might be like, is that really true? So I'm hot, I'm sweaty, I can't do anything right ever. No, is that really true? I might still be kind of salty and have an attitude is like, no, that isn't really true. I'm just really frustrated with this truck. Okay. So actually, even though I was still frustrated, I used disputation, and that is a very, very different statement that I'm just really frustrated with this truck. So so it's kind of, I think of it almost like a magic trick, right? Like, you ever seen a magician and they show you a trick and you're like, wow, how did they do that? Mind blown. And then they show you like they just got their pinky twisted around or something. And it's like, now that you know the trick, you're like, oh, any idiot could do that, right? So this trick, if you will, of disputation and understanding the mechanics of optimism and pessimism, it actually causes it to fall apart very easily, and you can start to watch your language a lot more. Now, I do have to say a little caveat to this. To be careful, the very first thing is it personal? You don't want to do that to the point that you're using thinking errors. So it's, the well, this is a stupid truck. Okay, you might have taken that a little bit too far. So anyway, so that's the mechanics of optimism and pessimism. Again, I recommend Martin Seligman's book, Learned Optimism, which will really, really help you in this endeavor. All right, to wrap things up, I wanted to talk about post-traumatic growth. And I found out about this. You might wonder, like, how does this happy guy, how does a happy therapist find out about all the science and happiness and positive psychology? Well, it's called the International Positive Psychology Association. And they call them a World Congress, and they usually have these roughly about every 2 years. So I think I've gone to the three of them. And the last one that I went to, I met Lisa Buxbaum, and she did this amazing presentation at the IPA conference that just like I felt like this tectonic shift as I was sitting there, as she was talking about the difference between post-traumatic stress disorder and post-traumatic growth. And she was saying, even though I had never heard of post-traumatic growth, she was saying that it's a lot more common for people to have post-traumatic growth than they do post-traumatic stress disorder. And so let me talk a little bit more about that, but I am going to put a link to a video, actually two, because Sonia Lubomirsky also did a video about post-traumatic growth. But now, what we're not talking about when we're talking about post-traumatic growth, something really terrible happens and you say, well, that's okay. I'm going to look on the bright side and I'm not going to let it get me down. No, that is not true post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is being angry and being sad and dealing with all the emotions head on. It's not glossing it over. There's actually a lot of research that says that that is really bad for you to just try to put on a happy face and act like everything is fine, especially when you have had a trauma. But when you do, in the final analysis, when you look at the whole thing, that you could see just by way of a couple of examples is you might find out that you're a lot stronger than you ever thought that you were. You might find out that you have a lot more support than you ever thought that you did. You can learn some amazing coping skills and how to deal with adversity by going through that adversity. So those are just a couple of examples. Another really big one is that it can give you a different perspective on life. Like maybe you were kind of taking things for granted. I saw an article one time, and you know how in magazines they'll take a quote and then they'll blow it up bigger, and so it like really stands out. And I was thumbing through this magazine, and it said, "Cancer is wasted on some people," and I was like, "What?" Like, and I was like, "Okay, you got me. You reeled me in. I've got to learn." And so when I read the article, what it was saying is that what they were really saying is that people had missed the opportunity for post-traumatic growth when they had survived cancer because let's say that they were kind of lulled to sleep. They were just kind of going along day to day, just, doing their thing and weren't really awake, weren't really aware of how fragile life can be. And then they got cancer and they survive cancer, and it wakes them out up and causes them to like, wow, this life is really something. And for every day that I'm alive, like I want to make the most of it. When they had people come out of the Nazi concentration camps, they really fell into two groups. They had, and this is all very understandable. Believe me, I'm so not pointing any fingers. But you had people that came out of the Nazi concentration camps and they were anxious and they were depressed and they felt, they were really, really struggling. And so they had post traumatic stress disorder, which is completely understandable. But there was another group of people that came out of those Nazi concentration camps and they basically said, you know what? Every day that I don't have to eat bugs to survive is a good day. So I'm going to live this life to the fullest while I can for however many days I have left on this planet. So I at least wanted to explain a little bit more about post-traumatic growth. And if your mind is blown like mine was at that IPA conference, to even know that that's even possible is just that you might be having that tectonic shift in your brain. So there's plenty of information out there. Like I said, I'm going to uh, give you some links in the comments to a couple of videos that will help put you on the path. Yeah, it really is a huge shift in the way that you can think about things. So that's it for today's class. Covered a lot of ground. There's actually quite a bit to cover for the home opportunities for this week. So the first one is build an arsenal. So I want to make sure that you have coping skills. So your arsenal is all kinds of different things that you could do to be able to deal with adversity. And that might be something as simple as taking your dog for a walk in the sunshine. It might be watching a funny video, um, concentrating on one of your hobbies. But it's super important for you to start to build your arsenal in order to deal with adversity. And then read your fourth highest happiness activity and make a short-term goal around your fourth happiness activity. And then this one, now that you know about thinking errors, like you can't unring the bell, you can't unknow what you know. So look over the list of thinking errors and figure out which ones that you use. And then again, don't use this as a stick to beat yourself with, but just in an effort to maybe not fall in the hole or at least get yourself out faster. Start being just for this time around, just start being more mindful of when you might be doing that. And then if you are, see if you can stop yourself. And then there's a fantastic video. I'd almost go so far as to say if you only did one thing for your home opportunities, Watch the video of Nightbird on America's Got Talent. I I don't think that I've made it through that video without crying. But it's like crying in a good way. It's so amazing. I became obsessed with Jane for a while and was seeking out any interviews or anything that I could get. And she's really somebody that walks the walk. Just truly an amazing spirit. So please watch that. For the optional home opportunities, show us what you've learned. So this would be you maybe videotaping a skit, or maybe you wrote a poem or something, but it would be sharing, kind of a giving back to the class, what you have learned in the class and how it may have changed you. Um, I actually had this one lady years ago that she made puppets, and she put on like this puppet show. It was like, and there's been posters, and uh, somebody made me a shirt, a Happiness 101 shirt. So blessed, so blessed. And then, an optional home opportunity is just to read Martin Seligman's Learned Optimism. I also put a couple of, oh man, so much good stuff. There's a Nightbird video interview with CNN, and then Rocky's speech to his son in the movie Rocky Balboa. Please watch that. I know it is in the optional home opportunities, but please watch that. It is so good. Love that one too. All right. Um, in the next exciting class, we're going to bring it all together. We're going to talk about this. I've mentioned before, it's not enough for you to know what your happiness, what activities that can bring you happiness. You also need to know the hows of happiness to be able to cement that in so that it actually sticks, unlike the New Year's resolutions. And we're going to talk more about the arsenal, languishing versus flourishing, hierarchy of needs, gratification versus pleasure. Yeah, it's a good time. Make sure that you take all of your tests. And that is a wrap for today's seventh Happiness 101 class. Thank you so much for being here. And I will see you again in the next class.